Have you ever asked, why isn't there a fifth note or third note? Well, many music teachers might simply say, because there isn't one. But, of course, there is. However, our rhythmic notation system certainly does not readily suggest the possibility of such rhythms.
So, you see, most music you encounter today, and most music written over the past millennium, is the result of what a mathematician might call dyadically rational rhythmic hierarchies. Namely, the result of a two-part division process. So, the whole note is divided into two half notes, each half note into two quarter notes, each quarter note into two eighth notes, each eighth note into two 16th notes, and so on. This is fundamentally an arbitrary choice arrived at over centuries of musical development. In fact, alternatives to this overriding diaticism have been proposed, though none have ever met with much success. However, the introduction of new modes of rhythmic expression that allow for the free use of other non-dyadic rhythmic values, such as fifth notes, seventh notes, 11th notes, 13th notes, would unquestionably open new fields of musical discourse.
The system I propose, pan-rational rhythmicity, is built from observations of past and present efforts to diversify rhythm beyond the hegemony of diaticism. Such efforts include the shaped note systems of the 14th century Ars Subtilior and the 20th century composer Henry Cowell, the proportional systems of 15th century theorists Johannes Tincturus and Francinus Scaffurius, and the 20th century irrational time signature systems as outlined by composer Paul Creston and popularized by composer Thomas Addis. From these attempts at rhythmic diversification, we take three fundamental premises. The first premise, the whole note, an established fundamental musical time unit, may be subdivided into any number of subdivisions without the necessity of the tuplet. The second premise, the time signature contains two operators. First, the lower number, which designates the nature of the whole note's subdivision hierarchy, and the second, the upper number, which designates the number of those subdivisions which may appear in a measure of music. The third premise, the lower number of a time signature may be any positive integer.
From these three premises, we may establish a system whereby one can notate any precise, rational subdivision of the whole note, and any combination of those subdivisions. Furthermore, non-dyadic subdivisions of the whole note may emancipate themselves from the segregation demanded by the tuplet. No longer do non-dyadic rhythmic values need to be sequestered to their family beneath the tuplet that demands completion. Rather, any rhythmic value may stand as equally valid and independent as any other, freely intermingling among rhythmic values of any family.
For example, imagine if I wanted to write a quarter note triplet in a 4/4 time signature, but I only wanted 2/3 of that triplet, namely 2 quarter notes in the 3 within the quarter note triplet. And then I wanted to return directly to duple time with no hint of the prior triplet. What would I do? Well, I would have to write the 2 notes of the triplet, but then in returning to the simple duple time, I would have to endlessly tie over values from within triplets. However, if I just recognize that I can create sixths notes, then I can specify I want 2 sixths notes without the use of triplets and many ties subsequently. This can be done using a pan-rational time signature, namely 2/6. Similarly, if we want 7 units of 5 equal subdivisions of the whole note, 1 2/5 of an 8th note quintuplet, interspersed among quarter notes, our present system of rhythmic notation would require an extremely cumbersome presentation of this conceit. However, if we dismantle the hegemony of diaticism and simply recognize the existence of 10th notes and provide a clear signaler of them, then the notation of this rhythmic idea becomes much cleaner.
Thus, by merely changing the time signature, the implied value of standard note shapes can change. though the tempo of the whole note remains constant. This appears similar to Creston and Addis's use of irrational time signatures. However, I will demonstrate how the system of pan-rationalism supplies all further levels of subdivision beyond merely the first given in the time signature, as well as ultimately allowing for the free intermixing of indivisible rhythmic values within a measure, both aspects unformalized and wholly absent from presently used rhythmic notation systems.
No longer irrational, our pan-rational time signatures signal not only classical time signatures, but also any novel, prescriptive rhythmic complex and its potential subdivision tree through the rule of prime factorization. Namely, if the first defined subdivision of the whole note, as given in the bottom number of a time signature, is into n equal parts, then all further subdivisions can be subdivided into any of the prime factors of n. From this premise, there are two general kinds of pan-rational time signature: perfectly regular and imperfectly regular. Perfectly regular rhythmic systems have only one prime factor, and so subdivide at all levels into the same number of equal parts. An example of this is our current system of time signature, wherein all subdivisions on all levels are into two equal parts. Imperfectly regular rhythmic systems have multiple prime factors in their first subdivision, and so can subdivide on any level into different values based on the different prime factors, allowing for a branching network of potential values.
Take, for example, 3-4, wherein all subdivision levels are divisible by the prior level, beginning with the first. Why is this? Simply because the prime factorization of 4 has only one unique prime factor, 2. Thus, all levels of rhythmic subdivision will be bipartite. Thus, 3-4 is perfectly regular. Similarly, 3-5 is perfectly regular. 5 is itself a prime number, and so has only one prime factor. Thus, in a time signature with 5 as the denominator, all rhythmic subdivisions should be into 5 equal parts.
Contrastingly, 5-14 is imperfectly regular. The prime factorization of 14 is 2 and 7. Thus, on any rhythmic subdivision level, we may choose either 2 or 7 as the subdivision unit. The continual binary option between two prime factors on any subdivision level creates regularity in the rhythmic hierarchy. However, our location in this continually branching tree may fluidly migrate from branch to branch, allowing for the free intermingling of not only dyadic values like half, quarter, eighth, or 16th notes, but also 7th, 14th, 28th, or 49th notes.
Let's go ahead and look at some basic examples of perfectly and imperfectly regular pan-rational time signatures. First, the perfectly regular.
To demonstrate the basic principle of pivoting traditional rhythmic notations to new rhythmic values via pan-rational time signatures, consider these three variations of a melody. The first given in 2-2, the second in 2-3, and the third in 2-5. In the first, all notes, apart from tuplets, are duple subdivisions. In the second, all notes, again apart from tuplets, are triple subdivisions. In the third, all notes are quintuple subdivisions. Though between each example, the note shapes themselves, as well as the tempo of the whole note, remain constant. Only the time signature changes. Let's listen.
While these time signatures may be used independently, as in the prior examples, it is perhaps more interesting to employ them together in alternation.
The next example takes the three variations and joins them, measure by measure. Important to realize is that this rhythmic feat is rather cumbersome to execute via standard notation. For example, one could write this passage using both tuplets and tempo changes, as seen here, or, even more intimidatingly, one could notate this whole passage with only tuplets and without tempo changes, as seen here. While the sound of the pan-rational melody is achievable in classical notation, as seen here, the notation of pan-rationalism is remarkably cleaner and less intimidating than the other possibilities. Furthermore, the pan-rational example is more intuitive to arrive at for a composer given an expanded definition of time signature than the alternative renditions, neither of which are necessarily obvious solutions.
In fact, the tuplet realization is only reasonable to notate if one realizes the simplifications achieved by writing this under the classical compound time signature of 12/8 rather than 2/2 as originally given. Notating this melody under a classical simple time signature, as seen here, would be exorbitantly cumbersome.
While arguably any rational rhythmic structure is accomplishable under tuplets and/or tempo changes, structures like this are astronomically difficult for a human performer to comprehend, let alone perform.
Notation via pan-rationalism makes the interpretation of this musical idea far more approachable, if not executable, merely due to the fewer symbols that need to be processed in any one moment. Now, let's consider the circumstance of imperfectly regular time signatures that have denominators with more than one prime factor. First, we should note that numbers with more than 2 prime factors are not easily performable or executable by humans. Consequently, let us confine ourselves in this short introduction to pan-rationalism to time signatures with only 2 unique prime factors, which determine our binary path of rhythmic subdivision.
Let's call these prime factors P and Q. Consequently, in time signatures in the form of x over pq, we are given access to not only P and Q rhythmic values and their related subdivisions, such as P squared, P cubed, Q squared, Q cubed, and so on, but also the rhythmic value of the prime factors products. That is, P times Q, Q squared times P squared times Q, P squared times Q squared, and so on.
To represent this branching rhythmic network, we consequently need a 2-dimensional framework of orthogonal P and Q values with their intersections. Between these 2 orthogonal paths, we establish the rhythmic PQ products.
We can visualize this hierarchy by a grid with P divisions along the vertical axis and Q divisions along the horizontal axis, with the region between the axes containing subdivisions of P and Q together. From the PQ note, one may subdivide in either the Q direction, moving right, or the P direction, moving down. When one subdivides by both P and Q together, one moves diagonally, both over and down, from the note being subdivided. Herein, to allow for P notes, Q notes, and PQ notes, we will need to add 3 note shapes to our standard set. First, the P hierarchy is represented by a forward slash through the note head. Second, the Q hierarchy is represented by a backward slash through the note head. Third, PQ notes apply flags for each additional PQ subdivision, with P subdivisions adding a traditional flag and Q subdivisions adding a flag with a vertical line.
Though we must add a few new note shapes to the present system of rhythmic notation, we circumvent the requirement to create new note shapes for all distinct rational rhythmic values, rather relegating the time signature to point us to the relative quality of any P, Q, or PQ note. If one wants to change the quality of their P, Q, or PQ note, they only need to change their time signature.
Ultimately, this addition to our present notation system essentially only adds 3 to 5 new note shapes due to human performance considerations. PQ notes that have high P or Q exponents will necessarily be very small rhythmic values and consequently inadvisable to use. Due to this, I have supplied colorized regions to this chart to suggest the most advisable rhythmic values. Green denotes reasonable note values. White denotes note values that should be used with caution based on tempo, rhythmic structuring, and other compositional parameters. Gray denotes essentially theoretical notes, inadvisable to use. Any further extension of this chart in the direction of subdivision will be gray. Purple and red denote respectively easily or reasonably performable notes, but which should be used seldomly. If used frequently, it might be advisable to change the time signature to the corresponding perfect regular version.
For the completion of the system, we also need to consider rest designations and combinative note values greater than either the P note, Q note, or whole note. For perfect regular time signatures with only one unique prime factor, rests would look simply like their traditional form. For imperfectly regular time signatures, the system of rests, to accord with the system of note shapes, would look like this.
Note that the rule for forward slash and backward slash for P and Q note heads is congruous with P and Q rests. For PQ rests, the vertical line is exchanged with a reversed rest flag. Similarly, just as with PQ notes requiring a vertical line for each additional Q part greater than the first Q subdivision, the PQ rest requires one reversed flag for each additional Q subdivision greater than the first. Just as one can subdivide notes, one can also multiply them or append part of a rhythmic value to itself via augmentation dots. Naturally, any combination of rhythmic values can be accomplished through the application of ties. However, sometimes it is efficacious to avoid numerous cumbersome ties with the use of a singular note sign. To such ends, an extension of the pan-rational rhythmic notation system is provided here. The region enclosed in red is the basic PQ hierarchy region as given previously. The region enclosed in black represents the aggregate of the green region of the basic set of note shapes and the region of extended values which are advisable to use. All those values outside the black region are not advisable. For values that lie outside the black region, it would likely be easier to communicate such rhythmic values by use of ties, rather than these exceptional note shapes, though these shapes are available nonetheless.
Now let's consider an example of an actual imperfect regular time signature, something over 15. Our two prime factors here are 3 and 5, giving us a pentadectatic rhythmic hierarchy, which we can abbreviate as pentadecaplex. The grid here provides us with a precise numerical value of each subdivision. Note that we have not supplied the values of notes within the white or gray regions, since they are essentially unusable. Let's conclude with an actual example of this notation in practice, using my work Rhythmomachia icosihexaplex for solo violin. Time signatures in this work are in the form of something over 26, with unique prime factors 2 and 13. This chart gives the rhythmic values of icosihexaplex. The notes highlighted in green are those used in this piece.
The opening of this work presents complete aggregates of the dyadic and tridectatic hierarchy, orienting the performer to the basic value of each subdivision. By measure 26, the performer encounters the first distinct pan-rational rhythmic idea that progressively transforms throughout the work. 2 4th notes plus 2 or 4 13th notes. By measure 40, the 13th note component of this rhythmic motive has slowly been subtracted to give the pan-rational rhythmic motive of 2 4th notes plus 1 13th note. Let's listen to the first 2 minutes of icosihexaplex.
Over the remainder of the piece, the reverse of the initial subtraction process ensues, progressively subtracting p-valued notes from the thematic rhythmic motive until measure 122.
By measure 122, an eighth note is presented in juxtaposition with the 13th note as a new and final rhythmic motive for the climax and conclusion of the work. Let's listen to the beginning of the final section of Ikosi hexaplex.
This system emancipates the composer from purely dyadic thinking, freeing them to select any singular rhythmic value and intermingle it with any other singular rhythmic value, no longer necessitating the segregation of differing rhythmic hierarchies by the tuplet or bar line. Through the freedom afforded by this refashioned and extended tool of temporal prescriptive encoding, the composer is encouraged to imagine, write, and audiate rhythmic ideas never before prescribed, no longer subconsciously bound to an artificial tyranny of diaticism as handed down for centuries.
For more information on Jordan Alexander Key's system of pan-rational rhythmic notation, please refer to his dissertation, Pan-Rational and Irrational Rhythm, the History, Development, and Modern Implementation of Nondyadic Rational Rhythms in Western Music, or contact the composer directly.